Today I'm going to show you how to make a super easy basic sourdough starter that's just made with plain all-purpose flour and water. If you can't find yeast or you want to use a more natural alternative, you can use a sourdough starter to replace instant yeast in pretty well any yeast leavened baking product. There are a lot of great, more complex recipes out there, but this recipe is super quick, easy, and only takes about 1 or 2 minutes of work a day to feed and maintain. So for this recipe, you'll need a glass jar with a loose fitting lid. I actually ended up needing a larger jar than I originally thought. You'll need a scale, I'll link to one down below if you don't have one, a spoon, a fork, flour, and water. And that's it. On day 1, take your container and measure in 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. Use a fork to stir this up until it's smooth. I find using a fork helps to prevent any really big chunks of flour. It's okay if there are a few lumps, but you want the mix to be mostly smooth. Cover loosely with a lid and set aside for 24 hours. On day 2, you can see that not much has changed. There are a few little bubbles, but not much activity. Get your jar back on the scale and measure in another 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. Stir this all up again, cover loosely, and set aside for another 24 hours. On day 3, we can see that there are little bubbles starting to form and the starter is beginning to rise a bit. Place the starter back on your scale and once again add in 50 grams of water and 50 of flour, stir and set aside until tomorrow. So on day 4, the starter is getting really bubbly and started to overflow out of this jar a bit, so I switched to a bigger jar. Once again, just adding in the 50 grams each of flour and water and stirring it up. I used the spoon I used for the flour here because I was lazy. Set this aside for another 24 hours. By day 5, you should have this light, bubbly starter that's doubled in size. You can bake with it straight away if you want, just make sure to reserve some starter to feed and keep, of course. To keep and maintain your starter, you can transfer it into a smaller jar for storage purposes, and all you have to do to maintain it is to mix the same amount in weight of starter, water, and flour. So I used 50 grams of starter, 50 of water, and 50 of flour, but you can do 100 grams of each, or 75 grams of each, or 382 grams of each. You get the point. Feed it every 24 hours if you're keeping it at room temperature, and every 4 or 5 days if you keep it in the fridge. So that is it for this super basic sourdough starter recipe. If you can't find instant yeast or want to use something natural, there are lots of recipes out there for sourdough alternatives. An example of this is this sourdough focaccia, which I'm going to be making next on the channel. So if you haven't already, consider subscribing and feel free to get in touch with me on Instagram at chefstudio_. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.